Good evening! Welcome to the third installment of Frankenstein, and the final installment, I think, we'll get it all done tonight. I'm here with my good friend, Angela Sudermann. We are friends, aren't we, Angela?
Yes, we are.
We are.
Are we?
Are we? I know we're
Most of the time.
Most of the time. All right. And so she's going to join me, and we're going to have a little banter, I guess, about this, all right?
Yep.
So are you ready to begin, or do you have something you need to tell the good folks at Pelham Road and beyond?
No, we're ready.
You ready?
Movie
That's right.
versus book.
Yes, she's read, no, she has watched the movie Young Frankenstein and been influenced severely, heavily by Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder. And she's just read the book, or listened to the book.
I'm listening to it. I'm about halfway through.
Okay. All right. So, you're going to ask me some questions, or you want to first talk about Young Frankenstein for a moment?
We
are freestyling this, by the way. Although these notes don't even pay any attention to them.
Yeah, here's what I've learned about from Young Frankenstein.
Okay.
Is that Frankenstein is not the name of the monster. It's the name of the creator. But the creator in the movie says, it's not Frankenstein, it's Frankenstein.
And that gets a laugh, right?
And that gets a laugh.
Okay.
Everything Mel Brooks does get a laugh.
What's one of my favorite lines in the movie is when Igor says, "Walk this way." Do y'all remember that? Maybe we should list at the bottom of this where they could find Young Frankenstein if they wanted to watch Young Frankenstein. Could we do that?
We could if I knew. Probably on Netflix.
Okay.
Or
Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
I might have to pay something on Amazon Prime. I don't know.
But it's well worth the.
Mm-hmm.
Well worth the watch.
Do you remember? Let's see if we can do this dialogue together. There's a point where the doctor is talking to Igor, and I think the doctor says, "Whose brain did you put in?"
Oh yeah, he sends him to get a brain.
Mm-hmm.
And Igor says the name was Abby? Abby Normal.
So you put an abnormal brain in a 7-foot, 56-inch. I guess he's maybe round, or his shoulders were that big. Gorilla?
Marty Feldman's like, whoops.
So, it has its funny lines. It does. It really does. But it's a lot different than the book, right?
Very much, yeah.
So, I think you have some questions for me, maybe. We'll see. I might have some answers for you. I just don't know.
Oh, so in the first episode, you tried to provide a history of the writer and a timeline of the times where the book was written, before and after. But because I do the slides, I'm hoping you have a little more to say about that. I
did have more to say, and I just cut it off, and I think you had to throw a couple of slides away because you're funny about things being copyrighted and so forth. During the late 1700s, there were many cases of people being revived after other people thought they were dead. They were actually declared dead, but they ended up being alive.
Oh, that's where the term dead ringer.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll get to that in a moment. But look that up. Look that up. It is hard to determine where life begins, but it is equally difficult in that day to determine where death began. Look up caskets with bells on them. You can see diagrams of this. It was something that wealthy people were able to afford, other people couldn't afford. But there was always this suspicion that people really weren't dead. And so they would bury them, and then they would provide a cord that came into the coffin. And then you would, if you woke up, you would pull the cord, and the cord would go, it was through the earth up to a pole that was about 8 foot off the ground, and you would ring a bell, which brings then the phrase,
"You're your dead ringer."
You're a dead ringer. Now, the thing about that was you had to count on actual people who were above ground who cared about bringing you back. All right?
So, or at least hearing it.
Yeah, that's right. So there were some flaws in that system. And this was a very colorful history. Again, I encourage you to look it up. It all happened in or around London. The challenge of determining death led to a real fascination with the human body, which often could not be truly examined. You really couldn't examine a body. It was frowned upon to examine the body until it was dead. So these stories would have made the London paper, these stories of these people who were thought to be dead but came back to life. So the stories of premature burial and the stories of people experimenting with dead bodies would have been stories that would have been in the London paper and that Mary Shelley would have seen as her raw material. I think you're going to actually put up a slide that shows the viewers a pamphlet about premature internment. It was written in 1816, and it was a pamphlet put out to warn people about the dangers of premature or premature internment. It's hard for me to say. But put that slide up and they'll see that book that you could actually read about this very subject. And so I'm sure all of that played into the raw material that Mary Shelley had in her imagination when she went to Geneva, is these stories of people who they thought were dead but really not dead, and they were experimenting with bodies. They were experimenting with frogs. I didn't even list this. I should have put a slide in about this, but some doctor in London experimented with frogs with electricity because electricity was new. And so they would take a dead frog and they would electrically shock its legs, and the muscles in the legs would vibrate for a while. And they mistook that to be being revived. It really wasn't. But again, it just fueled more interest in science. So that's a little bit more history to how she had the raw material to have the imagination to think of this story.
That's helpful. That she wasn't
Really?
like, yeah, where she would get this from. So in its preface, Frankenstein claims to be a novel that gives a sympathetic description of domestic affection. The novel is full of murder, tragedy, and despair, so how can you blame me for being a little confused and want to go back to Young Frankenstein? So what am I missing?
Well, all the tragedy, murder, and despair occur because freewheeling. They all occur because of loneliness. When we see the description, we think it's a how-to guide. When it says something like domestic affection, we think, oh, this book is going to tell us how to have this sort of tranquil domestic home life. It's really not a how-to guide. It's more of a don't do this guide. These are the things that you do that destroy harmony. And one of those things is loneliness. The true evil in Frankenstein is not Victor, the doctor, and it's not the monster. The true evil is loneliness. First, Victor, the doctor who creates this so-called monster, he becomes lost in his studies. He removes himself from human society. He has a singular pursuit. It's no longer about people. It's about his accomplishments, and he works all the time, and he just doesn't pay attention to the world around him, and he becomes lonely. Therefore, he loses sight of his responsibilities and consequently his actions. Then the monster, or the creature, turns vengeful. Not because he's evil, but because he's in isolation himself. The one person who created him, the doctor, Victor, runs away from him. And so he is filled, now when you get lonely, you're filled with hate and anger. And what is the monster's revenge to try to make his life feel better? Well, it's to make Victor isolated. He tries to isolate Victor by killing all the things that matter to him. Add it all up, and it becomes quite clear that Frankenstein sees isolation, the book Frankenstein, sees isolation from family and society as one of the worst imaginable fates. And it causes hatred and violence and revenge. And I think that's one of the lessons, is that this is what happens when we become lonely, isolated people. And isolation is really more than loneliness. I really should state that. Isolation is not loneliness simply. Isolation is becoming invisible to other people. The writer here, Mary Shelley, is very observant for an 18-year-old. I mean, she probably felt herself to be a little invisible in the world after her mother's death and her dad shipped her off to school. And when we feel isolated, when we feel like we are ignored, we respond with hate and violence. That's just our response to being isolated. or it seems to be in the book.
I may be jumping way ahead, but I'm in the part of the book where the creature is telling his story about this time span between his creation and the current time. And it's so sad because he's wants to be accepted, and he clearly isn't, because people scream when they see him, but he's still very kind and has a very generous spirit at this point in the book.
As he's retelling this tale, one of the things he tells is that he saved someone's life, right? Wasn't there someone drowning?
I haven't gotten to there yet, but now he's with the cottagers, and he's doing kind things for them.
Okay. And in that cottage, there's a blind man, right?
Yes.
And that's another sort of recurring theme in this story, is prejudice. You know, the blind man has no problem with the creature because he's blind,
right.
He doesn't see him. Yeah. But everybody else who was able to identify him and see him and had appearances, they prejudged him as what he was, and so they ran away, or they screamed, or they did whatever. And the minute that the son, I think it's the son of the villager, comes in and sees this creature talking to his father, he's scared and moves the family overnight, practically, I think. And so there is this situation where prejudice is another theme, that you don't get to know people, and so you prejudge them by their appearances, and that is fatal, at least to this creature.
And I don't know, I think it's really sad that the creature never has a name.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point.
So, did I jump ahead again?
I think you might have jumped ahead again, but I think I can remember, or I think you might have jumped back. You're jumping all over the place. You're really testing me out here. All right. He doesn't have a name. He calls himself, when talking to the victor one time, Adam. He says, "I'm your Adam." And then from time to time, people will call him, he's called monster, I think, twice. An ogre? Is that a word?
Ogre?
Ogre. He's called an ogre once, I think, maybe twice.
And a thing.
Called a thing. But you're right, he never, the Creator didn't give him a name, and he doesn't name himself, and no one else takes the time to name him. And that is an interesting part of the story. He's able to say to his Creator, "I'm your Adam, but I'm not Adam." And to others, he's just this thing.
And because you've already mentioned he was invisible. And part of the invisibility is not even having a name.
That's right. He didn't have a name. He didn't already come up with a name. It'd be a good thing.
Fred.
Well, when you say Fred, of course, we go right to the Monsters. The TV show The Monsters had the father of that bunch was Fred Gwynn. I think his last name was Gwynn or something like that. You know, when you call him Fred, you think, You know,
that's what he looked like.
That's what he looked like. Yeah, that's true enough. All right, I think I don't know if there was any more I had to say about that or not, but you've jumped all around, so I don't know.
Yeah, I jumped back to the beginning because I don't think we did that. But
okay.
So, why Frankenstein? What interested you? What got you started on Frankenstein?
Well, I studied one summer at the Vancouver School of Theology, and one of the courses I took had the title Scripture, Science Fiction, and the Problem of Evil. And see, one of the recurring questions in the study of religions is the problem of evil. Where does evil come from? And you know, we debate about this. We talk about, you know, this is something people talk about all, you know, just around dinner tables. Where does evil come from? And I thought, well, that'd be an interesting course to take. And so, in that course, we were introduced to a great deal of science fiction and how science fiction writers approached. They would set a story way into the future, And in setting it way into the future, they could actually talk about something that was happening right now. And they tried to answer it in this safe environment, the struggles we have with evil. Now, what I discovered, whether it was Philip Dick or Space Odyssey 2001, what I discovered was that their answers weren't any more fulfilling than what we, have had over the course of time. They were nice attempts, and they're good stories, but I didn't think they were really that compelling. Now, in that study, we had to read Frankenstein, because it was introduced to us that Frankenstein was the first work of science fiction. And so that's how I got fascinated with Frankenstein, is because I was exploring it as, what does this say about evil and why we have evil in the world?
So what did you learn about evil?
Actually, I don't think the book spoke to me as much as it did to my professor about an answer for evil. It does intersect that question somewhat, but that's not what spoke most powerfully to me about it. What spoke most powerfully to me was nature and nurture, which I think is another conversation that we have around our dinner tables a lot, is, how do people change? How do our children become who they are? Is it the nature they received in the DNA that we gave them, or is it the nurture that we provided in the home? And here's a situation where, you have a creature whose nature you don't know a heck of a lot about, because it's all just, a piece here and a piece there, whatever. But you really do have a story of nurture. And the story is, this particular creature was unnurtured. And this is what happens when you do not nurture someone. When someone doesn't take the ownership of nurturing someone. And the creator, Victor, rejected him. He got close to a family one time, but they ended up rejecting him. Village after village rejected him. And when we reject people, and when we don't give them any nurturing, what are we to expect? That they not, they become monsters. I mean, monster's probably a strong word, but that's what he became. Mm-hmm. And so it's very important that we figure out how to nurture our own, but also to nurture others. That, and that's what a school teacher does. I mean, so much of the time a school teacher is nurturing children. They're not really teaching material as much as they're nurturing children. So that's what I heard the loudest. All right.
Well, we need to bring this to a close. I am listening to a book I never thought I would, and I'm really enjoying the process of the listening, but also the story is very deep. Certainly not Young Frankenstein.
Well, I do think older books lend themselves to the audio media. The audio media. And for this reason, we're used to watching on television and hearing with our ears this language when we listen to Pride and Prejudice or watch Pride and Prejudice or David Copperfield or something like that. We're not used to reading it. So when we're trying to read it, it becomes rather laborious. But when we're hearing it, we can connect the dots a little bit better when we're hearing it. So I do think the audio format is a really smart way to experience Frankenstein. And I wanted to end this on sort of a positive note. I know the book, life is not always positive though. The book ends sad. I mean, there's no way to around that. And that's the isolation and the non-nurturing environment that he was in. This is what you end up with, is this sort of sadness. And so I would love to wrap it up and say something positive, but I don't think you can be unfair to a piece of art like this and try to say, read it and you'll be inspired. No, you'll learn something. You might be changed, but you're not going to finish reading it and go, well, I'm just on cloud nine. You're going to read it and think, who are the people in my life that I need to give more nurture to?
Yeah.
And how can I do that? And that's a good lesson. So, thanks for joining us. I'm John. This is
the sidekick, Angela.
Victor and Igor.
What hump?
So, hope you've enjoyed this. See you next month. Next month, we're going to do Let Your Life Speak by Parker Palmer.
Ooh.
Do you know who Parker is?
Yes.
That is a great book.
I'd have to get it.
I'm absolutely going to put the full court press on us to read that book in staff and everywhere. I love that book. It's 20 years old now. Oh, well, 17 years old now. But it's a great book called Listen to Your Life. And you'll probably see a promo in the next few weeks about it. All right? Have a good night.
Thank you.